Next guest has been through all of the stages of what it means to fund a startup. He's mentored startups all over the world. He's co-founded an accelerator and actually has mentored startups in other accelerator programs. So I'd like to welcome Mike for our next presentation from Venture to Capital.
All right, thank you. So hi everyone, my name is Mike Reiner. I do business development for venture capital for Amazon Web Services. My background is I've started a few companies. So one of them is an accelerator called Startup Wise Guys. It's a B2B accelerator that I started in Estonia, managed it for 3 years. We invested in more than 50 B2B startups. And I thought I'd talk a little bit more about that road to venture capital and some lessons learned along the way. Before I start, if you're a VC or a startup in the audience, you want to know more how to partner with us, with Amazon Web Services in particular. A few of our team members also there. Come talk to me afterwards. Love to have a chat. So I want to talk about 3 things on your road to venture capital. And that's one, I want to talk a bit more about the idea. And I'd love to see bold ideas, especially in Europe, because I think Americans are very good at selling themselves and stressing big visions. And I think in Europe we can do better. I want to talk a bit about the experiment, about validation and what it means to actually validate the idea and show that's worthwhile. And then I want to go just zoom into a few tips of what I've seen teams do wrong over and over again. Christoph had the same with the clicker. Let's see. Otherwise, might need some help. Okay. So let's start with idea. And instead of talking about like startup ideas, what I want to do, next slide, take one back. All right. Take an example of a government and then say, if a government can be innovative, then certainly a startup can be. So there's a question that started with can our number of citizens grow 300x? And before I get to this question, I want to tell you a bit of a story. So when I moved to Estonia to start Startup Wise Guys, the accelerator, we were very involved in building the ecosystem, getting an angel network up and running. And at a certain point, it was this man, as the president of Estonia, who got a whole bunch of entrepreneurs together and asked the question, what should we do with entrepreneurship towards 2020? So the president he has an IT background actually, very entrepreneurial. I think his first tweet on Twitter was, "Help, I'm being followed." And he's been on like all major startup events. Also, whenever a startup in Estonia launches, he would be the person to come support them, tweet about them. So he's incredibly engaged in the startup ecosystem, which has helped Estonia a lot to build, to promote startup, and to be successful given a country of 1.3 million people, right? So what we did is we got a bunch of entrepreneurs together and we brainstormed about like, what can we do? What are things we can do? Typically the first thing was a startup hub. So the discussion, I wanted to build a larger hub, and then we brainstormed about, okay, what if we would do it slightly different? So this is an example. There's a museum in Estonia called the Seaplane Harbor. And so I asked the question, like, what if we would take a museum like this and change it into a startup hub? And then you take a submarine, send pictures of startup desk in the submarine, and say anyone can apply to get a desk for free, right? You would get a lot of PR. I think something like Startup Chile has done to get a lot of entrepreneurs over. To do something slightly different, give a twist to it, and gain a lot of marketing value. And a lot of people, for instance, when they talk about Startup Chile, they say it's a lot of taxpayer money wasted, but I actually think the marketing value alone was worth it. So the whole discussion we had was around how can you take something standard like a startup hub, for instance, and turn it into something that can gain marketing value. Or if you take education, right? There's more and more universities now that have a hands-on focus. When they teach entrepreneurship, it is actually about like a curriculum, they incubate it, companies actually building, there's a company builder element to it. But if we take this one step further, I don't believe in degrees anymore. I think in our economy nowadays, a bachelor and master degree is going to be increasingly worthless. And if you talk about entrepreneurship in particular, I don't think a master degree, I don't think entrepreneurship can be taught, right? So if you want to still teach at a university, then I would go rather have people give the thesis, like the part of this thesis, skip it altogether and just incubate and execute. So what I mean is, if you teach entrepreneurship, you have an incubation model, you predefine KPIs of what it means to be successful, and then if the company is successful, you get the master degree for free. One other thing we discussed is, if you want to gather ideas, why don't you put a competition out there and say, anyone can apply, essentially send their idea of what Estonia should do with entrepreneurship, and the winner becomes the co-president of Estonia. So again, it's a lot of PR value, you get tons of ideas for free, and it doesn't cost you anything. So one idea, to get back to the initial question, was a virtual citizen. So the idea of how can we grow our country 300x will never be achieved physically. So there was a guy called Sten Tamkivi, he was the ex-CEO of Skype, and he came up with the idea of virtual citizens, which is now launched, and it's been going for a few years. And anyone, you guys can apply to become a virtual citizen of Estonia. You get an ID card, and you can use their e-government services, everything for free. What I think is more interesting about this is the question of where are you going to pay taxes in the future? Right? Is it going to be restrained by a country, physical borders, or is it going to be virtual, as we're traveling more and more? So the second stage of the experiment, if you have a bold idea, the second question then is how to properly validate. And when I was running the accelerator, I kept getting the question of, Mike, can I outsource customer validation? And I kept saying, no, you cannot outsource customer validation. Especially developers want to sit behind the desk, keep coding, work on the product. So one thing you cannot skip. So there was also when governments asked me, like, should we build another accelerator, I'd rather turn this into something focused. So rather build a validator, a very focused program that takes one thing and does one thing very well. In this case, validation. And there was a guy called Rob Fitzpatrick. He wrote a book called The Mom Test. And what I love about this book is it takes one specific element, which is asking questions to customers and making sure you ask the right questions and validate the right thing. So he has a statement of, if you ask your mother whether what you're doing is great, what do you think your mother's going to say? Of course it's great. Right? Your mother will always encourage what you're doing. And it's the same thing for everybody. The idea of, like, if you ask the wrong questions, everybody will confirm and send you off to do more of it. And the problem with this is that it's obvious you should go out and talk to customers, but if you ask them questions like, would you buy this product? Do you think this is a good idea? Or how much should I pay for this? What will end up happening is you get all kinds of false information. You will start keep doing what you're doing, and you might waste years chasing the wrong thing. So better questions to be asked are questions that focus specifically and quantify things, right? Like, let me go to the next one. This clicker, there we go. So questions that are in particular focused on how do you solve this problem? Sit with a startup, right? Show me how. How much are you currently paying for this? How much have you paid for this in the past? What's your budget? When do you do this? So very, very obvious questions that I keep seeing startups doing wrong over and over and over again. And what we did with the accelerator is actually go with teams out there, just sit, watch them do the interviews, and give them feedback based on it. And it's important in every single stage, right? Not only in the beginning where you validate a new idea, it's the same thing later stage when you're already doing sales. You want to go back and back to the customer over and over again. So when it comes to fundraising, in particular, one thing that I see startups doing wrong is they start the discussion with a question of how much equity should I give away? So I want to just stress 3 tips and 3 things what I would do with fundraising. And that is, fundraising takes time, and that means if you spend 6 months trying to raise money from VCs, that also means that the CEO, who's most likely to do this, loses the time to do sales, loses the time to focus on the business, wastes a lot of time talking to a shit ton of investors in the period that is most critical where you want to show traction. And that's one thing when people think, I need money right now, that people often forget. Right? It takes a lot of time. It takes typically 6 months to raise and close a round. And in those 6 months, you have spent additional time to build the decks, to go to shit of investors, to have all these meetings. And you get over and over and over investors who ask you the same questions but reject you for very, very different reasons. And the reality is, it's all about momentum. At the end of the day, the investor only wants to have this feeling of, I have to get into this deal. And the investor has an invested interest of delaying this process as long as possible. Because as long as the valuation is not going up, the investor doesn't care. He can get in later at lower risk. Which also means when you try to get to investors, always go Firewarm intro. So I had a lot of startups reaching out directly, cold via LinkedIn, and the reality is like no investor will put money in a company when it's like via a very cold, unvalidated channel, or it rarely happens. Because it ends up in spam. You know, they might scan it, especially if there's a lot of information. There's no initial trigger there. It hardly ever happens that a company raises money with a cold reach out. So it should always be by someone you trust, and the closer the person is to the investor, the better. LinkedIn is an obvious tool where you can track who's connected to whom, but always try to already build those relationships before. Right? And when it comes down to how to approach the fundraising process, one thing that I would love to see startups do more is actually turn the process around. So it means if you're raising money, what I would do is like go to investors, all the investors you talk to, and say, I'm not raising money right now. I'm raising money in 6 months' time. So let's say you tell the investors, I'm closing at the end of March. I'm closing a round. I want to take the time for you to get to know us, for us to get to know you. And in those 6 months, there's 3 milestones I want to show you, whatever your KPIs are. And then whenever you're ready, you approach the investor again. You reach out, hey, we just achieved our milestone. Do you want to have a coffee? And you build that relationship. And what this will do is that, one, the investor will begin like, why don't you need money right now? So it will be triggered. Second, you take over the control of the process, and then you manage it as a sales funnel. You approach a lot of investors, you manage it as a sales funnel, where you reach out every time. You can mark, are they interested, yes or no? And you can ask this in the beginning. You can ask in the beginning, you say, based on this milestone, I'm going to close the round. Are you interested, yes or no? And if there's doubt, you can see you can see in the body language how serious a person is, and based on this, you mark them. Whatever grade you want to give them, serious to no serious. And you treat it like a sales process again. And the key here is, it's all milestone based. What I mean is, you want to show the investor what's the milestone based on which you're going to raise, and you're also going to show the investor how long the money is going to last, what's the next milestone in place, based on which you're either going to raise the next round, or you're going to be profitable, whatever that milestone is, that makes sense to the investor. So the investor knows the money he puts in, you will get to the next milestone and are able to survive. And that's it. So, in that sense, it's always one thing that investors know, and I've had learned the hard way with an accelerator, is if you accelerate shit, it might briefly look like chocolate, but certainly won't taste like it. So, with that in mind, thank you guys. I think it's lunchtime, so.
Thanks, Mike. I think there might be some questions for you, so don't run away just yet.
All right.
Any questions for Mike? We have time for one or two. I know people are hungry, but there we go.
Go ahead.
There's been some talk. Thanks for the presentation, and congratulations for what you've done. There's been some talk in Silicon Valley VCs, like Chamath, for example, who said early stage VCs are no longer in the business of venture capital. They're in the business of product market fit capital, because there's been this paradigm shift. You know, startups are becoming easier, quote unquote, to at least build to a MVP stage, you know, we now require some evidence of traction. Even if it's B2C, you know, it can be pre-revenue, but you need 1 million users. If it's B2B, you know, you need at least 30% monthly growth and blah, blah, blah. Do you see that as being a global thing? So is that what's true in Silicon Valley is true everywhere else? And the other question is, what advice would you give to startups who think that early stage VC is pretty much the only way to get seed funding when there's lots of other things out there like angels, incubators, accelerators?
So the first question, whether I think it's a global thing or not, I think certainly when you look at raising money just based on an idea is very, very tough, right? And I think it can certainly be done, but it can only be done if it's a team that has massive, massive experience. Because at the end of the day, the investor will always put in the money for the team, right? Like, of course, it's a checkbox. The market has to be big enough. The execution has to be right. But at the end of the day, they'll put the money in for the team. And I think what you see in Europe is more, let's say, conventional investments. So I think in US VCs typically have this bet of it has to be an outlier. Especially larger funds, the whole investment philosophy is if this cannot be a billion-dollar company, it's not worth our time. And that's true for most US-based investors, and the opposite is true in Europe, because European investors treat it on a risk basis, like, okay, what's the risk that this is going to fail, and I want a return. So I think that's a major difference that you see European-based and US-based. And you're right that early-stage VCs are, at this point, really focused on the validation. And the good thing there is that you see more and more focused VCs, like for instance, Point 9 Capital in Berlin, completely SaaS focused. They know their game exactly, they know the KPIs exactly, and they'll go in with the money to do this proper validation. If it scales, they'll put more money in. If it doesn't, they won't.
Just sort of like a German Bessemer in that sense.
Yes. Yeah, did this answer your question? The second part was a question VC or angels, and I would always go for angels if you can in the beginning, because it's easier. Then it's about picking the right ones. It's a different discussion. But to give you one example, what I did with 3 portfolio companies that needed a bridge round, raise money, they couldn't get that from a VC. I invited 10 angels, and also 10 angels I knew very well. We had a nice dinner, and we talked a bit about stuff unrelated to business. But towards the end of the dinner, I just said, look, there's 3 portfolio companies here, and you already like them, but they need a bridge round, and we need to close it. And I picked a very low amount. So I said, for the first one, I said, I just need 50,000 to make this happen. And I went to the craziest angel in the room, and I went to him, and I asked in person, are you willing to put in 15,000? And was just silent. And he knows the team already, and he likes the team, and he said, okay, fuck it, I do it. So if the first in, so I walked to the second. Do you want to match it? So there's the social pressure already. He said, okay, fuck it. If I say no, I look like a dick. I'll put in 15,000. It's not much money. I put it in as well. So I actually managed to close for all 3 in that dinner, the round. But what was more interesting is I was asking for very low amounts. So the first one, for instance, for 50,000 euros. And then afterwards, they talked to the angels. And the angel said, look, you don't need 50, right? You need like at least 90 to get to this milestone. So they ended up paying double, putting double the money in. But it's all finding the right triggers. What also works very well is, for instance, like if it's an angel with a family, and you know someone in the family is very passionate about something that you might be doing. The perfect way is to get that person try it out. If the husband or the wife of the angel investor like tries out the product, loves the product, and then shows us like, look, I love this. That's pretty much the best validation you'll get.
Thanks.